My name is Garrett Vorreuter. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a father. I'm a director, a writer, a cinematographer, or director of photography, depending on which one of those titles you use. I do the creative services for local television station, Channel 7 at the moment. And I teach at one of the local colleges.
Tell me what first drew you into directing and how that path evolved into ghost directing.
I think my path into directing really stems from storytelling. My goal was to be at the helm of the picture and to, kind of dictate and pace and deliver the story. I think when you start this stuff, if you started it the way I did, you kind of have to wear every hat. And, nobody's going to direct for you. And nobody's going to care more than you'll care. And if you're going to direct, the onus of it being successful or failing is, right on your shoulders. So, it's one of those jobs people think they want but don't really know until they have it. And then, hopefully they love it. But it's a difficult job, as is almost every position on film if you do it right and you try as hard as possibly can.
And that evolved into ghost directing, right? Can you explain what ghost directing is?
Sure. While living in Los Angeles, I had a stint being a ghost director, which is a very interesting position where you're hired to either finish a film that was unsuccessfully finished, or maybe it was finished but didn't work and they needed somebody to come in and reshoot or re-edit, or oftentimes it was both, large chunks. Sometimes the last one I did was like 3/4 of the whole movie. And also, as a ghost director, I was hired to help build people's reels, and their portfolios. So, say you had a lot of money and you wanted to take all your cool things and cool people and do cool work, but like you didn't know what you were doing, but you wanted the clout of doing it and being able to post on socials, you might hire me to do the work and then take the credit yourself. You pay more if you're going to take the credit.
That sounds very interesting. So let me ask you a question about LA. How did working in LA shape your approach towards being, the difference between a director in LA and being a director in Buffalo, let's say?
I can't say, I think your directing styles should be part of your identity. And, hopefully if you end up moving to a place like New York or Los Angeles for work, you've got a clear sense of your identity before you go. Otherwise you're going to be chasing. When I went to Los Angeles, I'd already shot my first feature film. And so I was already a filmmaker. Then, the term director in Hollywood, in Los Angeles, carries a lot of clout with it. And, there's a lot of people that, are directing, but to do it, they're hiring people much better than themselves to kind of safeguard them from failure. And, in Los Angeles, you can do that quite a bit because there's so many people that know what they're doing. And there's always people moving there that want to work and want to get involved. So, you can do that for a long time. I don't think you can do it forever, because people kind of square up to it. And, people want to work for people that really know what they're doing and have a clear sense of the vision and, can inspire them while they're working, because, they're not going to grow unless they're inspired to grow and kind of directed to challenge themselves. So, Los Angeles was one of those places that helped reaffirm who I thought I was. Challenged me in ways I didn't think was possible. Certainly, the chaos of some of the films I had the experience of being on. I wouldn't really necessarily call it a privilege, but I'm 2-0 in forest fires, which is my big claim from my Los Angeles run. Got to shoot a couple of features, a bunch of neat content. Got really versed with the red camera systems and got to shoot with some fun lenses. One of the music videos I directed, ghost directed actually, Was on a Panavision camera package with 16 millimeter film, and only had a couple of reels, 400 foot. So I had to be really strategic about it. Producer fighting me all along the way. But it turned out great. So I had a great run. I still have very close family friends out in California that I still love and miss, and we'll probably work with again in the future. But in terms of being a director or a storyteller, stories are everywhere. It's wherever you want to look and kind of peel the wool back and kind of see what the substance of it is. So, I don't know if I was super inspired in Los Angeles as a filmmaker, as a writer. I was more into Baja, Mexico, to be honest.
Was there a defining moment in your career that you felt like this project is what brought me to another level?
I don't think there's any keystone moment yet in my life where I felt like, I've arrived, I've made it, this is what it feels like to be fulfilled or satisfied by the act of making. I think there's a part of me that'll never be content with anything I make. I'll settle with it at some point, and my chief goal is to make sure that it's super watchable, that people can enjoy it, right? But you have to have tough expectations of yourself and of the work, right? Because only you will know whether or not you achieved, everything you were capable of. I did have I did a experimental film last year, semi autobiographical, that I started with. Here, want help, Junebug?
I want to keep saying that.
He's getting tired. I'll ask you a few more questions.
Hold on, let me try to finish that one. Okay. So, I did get a lot of enjoyment out of an experimental film last year. It was semi-autobiographical and kind of did out of a sense of seeking catharsis for life changes that were going on in my life, where it was propositioned to do film with a collaborator. There was a film festival at, I think, Ujima Theater, which is a black theater in Buffalo. And, I decided on doing this film, and it was interesting because it was one of those movies that I just knew it was going to screen, and I knew it was going to make it for me. And, screening a work that nobody knows you've made in front of a bunch of strangers and seeing them receive it really well, maybe the most well out of everything I screened that night. That was like a win. That was a win.
Sounds like a win. It's a good feeling. So, what are the misconceptions that people have when it comes to ghost directing? I mean, how would you approach somebody? Does somebody normally approach you? Do you see a friend in need and say, hey, I can do this for you? How does that work?
No, ghost directing and how I picked it up was, it was a bunch of rich people that kind of networked with each other that kind of felt like I was getting thrown around from person to person. So started out fixing one person's movie, then ended up being ghost director for a bunch of fashion style, content things, music videos, just whatever they wanted to make, but they didn't necessarily have the means. They just kind of kept throwing me in, especially because at a certain point, they kept acting as if I was on salary, you know what I mean? Because one person was basically paying for everything. So my days were my days. I could, either I'm fixing a movie that day or I'm doing someone's music video. So I don't necessarily know that most people even know it's a job, right? Most people aren't involved with the fixing of feature films, you know what I mean? There's only a few real great examples of that in Hollywood. I think Poltergeist is a great one. Poltergeist had a director on who may have been spun out on drugs and wasn't able to get the film done correctly, and I think Steven Spielberg went back and fixed it, but never took credit for it. So it's like, it's got to be stuff you're willing to do the work for and not have credit for.
How often is, in your opinion, does the director end up being the producer, and how often do you actually get a producer? And
So I don't know of many cases where you're working through the independent film channels as a director where you're not also a producer, right? Now some of it can be like, kind of there for like equity breakouts and things like that, that'll help you like for other reasons. Like there's other reasons why people want to get those titles and why people won't share those titles with other people, Like, when I first started this stuff, it's like, I'll throw titles around like they were money, Oh, you want to be a producer? Oh, you want to be this? You want to be that? Sure. But then, in some cases it devalues those titles if you do it too much. But, generally, like, if you have a story that you are going to tell, you're going to get it to celluloid or you're going to put it to digital film, and it's on you, then it's almost impossible to not be a producer. And if you're not, it might be because you don't want the title included. But I think most of the great filmmakers, that are directors, are also producers. I think Scorsese's a producer on his thing. Francis Ford Coppola is, the Coen brothers, I believe. I would wager that Tarantino's also a producer on his things. I think it's one of those titles that, it comes with a job, And when you work for other people, directing, and you're not a producer, you really can't, you don't have control over, the hiring, over how the money gets used. It could be shut down, you could be fired, replaced. So I think if you're going to direct and you're going to be at the helm, you should try to maintain a producer title as well.
as a director, there's a lot of different hats, but as a director wearing hats, there's also different director kinds. So would you consider yourself like an acting director, or some people call it like a more of a crew director, where you follow the crew,
or a technical director,
or a technical, yeah. What would you consider yourself? And which one is your favorite? Because I know you've probably done all of them.
Sure. I've always considered myself an actor's director, right? Which doesn't mean that I shout and control actors. In fact, it's the opposite. I really want to see them like do their thing and surprise me and show me things and teach me things about the character that I didn't even know, right? So that's a journey, type process, when you get to do that. And you're like on that journey with the actor to find that stuff, and you're there to like, not shepherd them, but to help guide them and make them feel secure and safe and free to do that work. However, I had to and have been learning since the start of this the technical side of it, right? So from the photography side, especially, I think, I'm getting pretty good at being able to strip things down to, it's almost its most minimalist needs, to be able to produce any given scene and get up and down the field. I used to always just do like strategic coverage, right? So I'd always shoot the coverage and just kind of work on the performances. At this point I can kind of go, I can do that, or I can be more specific and get exactly what we need. But I'm definitely not the type of person that loves to just sit and do like the shot breakdown and everything has to be storyboarded. Like I really do like the not the chaos, but the creative freedom of finding it, there in the moment, rather than like limiting myself to, a preconceived notion or vision in my head and making everybody, jump to that beat, dance to that beat. Like I really do want to find that beat together. So, I would say I'm more loosey goosey than a technical director, but I certainly have it in my wheelhouse. And then this last movie, Unbelievable, I did a ton of the VFX in it. So I don't find myself leaning towards doing more work in that world. Like taking the deep dive, but I certainly know that it's available to me, and it's definitely waters that I'll continue to touch and play in. But like I don't think I'm writing anything that's going to be a visual effects heavy thing that where you have to create the whole world there. But I do have a feeling that at some point I will make things in virtual environments, or even direct in a virtual environment where I can just put on like a headset and direct a scene that I'm not even there because it's being shot in like Saudi Arabia or something. I look forward to that day, and that's definitely coming because you'll be able to pipe live feeds from the cameras right into the headset. You'll be able to speak, in real time with the crew and the actors. Maybe I get like a cool avatar, We'll see. We'll see.
So if you could leave me with one piece of advice, and I really mean me, for maybe the best way to approach becoming a director when I graduate, what would you recommend?
Sure. June, you want to sit in my lap for this one?
No.
Okay. Kat Martinez, my grand, valuable piece of advice for you is don't wait, create. Don't wait for somebody to give you permission. Don't wait until you have the perfect thing all lined up and the perfect crew and the perfect actors. Like, find a way to go make something that's big and it's scary and it's going to draw from you in every which way that you could conceive, and it'll challenge you to take the steps necessary to become a director, your next self, or your next form, or whatever that creative plateau is as you keep moving up the ranks. And once you get there, don't settle. Find a way to challenge yourself again, and increase the stakes and increase the challenges, and do it again. If you repeat that over and over again, you'll have a track record of movies. And success is really in your own eyes.